Test this.
Sweater on.
Test.
Should be okay.
Yeah, but.
I'm sure you must have heaters here.
Little portable one.
Probably.
That's a demo.
Mm-hmm.
That is so tiny.
I heard footsteps.
I'm kind of a clomper now.
I was looking for people paddling.
Yeah, okay.
Got one viewer.
All right, well,
Somebody's online?
You get your own copy.
Ooh, wow.
yeah.
Also.
Well,
More room there.
oh, so we're live already?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, then we probably ought to start talking. Notice I said we? Yeah, that's kind of like when the nurse comes in and says, we're going to take our medicine. So, all right, well, I guess I need to remind you guys that you are the ones with the questions, and anybody who's online, but anybody that needs to ask a question, I mean, this is not a speech. This is a group effort here. So, if you have the printout, the first, like I told you guys earlier, I had a really hard time trying to figure out exactly what level to present this at, because when I start looking at it, hi, come on in, grab something to eat and drink and find a place to sit.
Well, I would think that, I thought about this on the way down, to the whole 30-second spot. But, define boondock, and I'm not asking you to do it.
Well, actually,
You put it in here someplace?
actually, let's start on the second page,
Okay,
because that's exactly what I thought when I looked at all this. Boondocking simply means you're not hooked up to water and electricity. Dry camping tends to mean the same thing to a lot of people. It means that you're not in a campsite where you plug in and you have water hydrant right there. And full hookups means that you have a sewer connection. So most of the time a campground is going to have the basics, which is a flat place for you to park your trailer, camper on, whatever, and it's going to have water and electricity. Full hookups means it also has sewer connections. A lot of nicer campgrounds now will have cable hookups and all of that. So boondocking or dry camping generally refers to not going into a campground where you have water and electricity. You are camping away from all the amenities. That's what that generally refers to. Now, when you look at the land that's available, there is public land that's available that has campsites, and they don't usually have hookups. Some of them have water, but most of them don't have hookups, but they're still campsites. So then there's talk about remote camping, and boondocking doesn't necessarily relate to remote camping, although that's what a lot of boondockers like to do. You want to be out there where nobody else is camping next to you, and oftentimes you want to be where you can't see anybody else at all. So if you're talking about government land, or you're talking about BLM land, or anything like that, that's official, it generally talks about it as dispersed camping, which is an interesting term, but that's kind of the government term. And what it means is they're not providing you with anything except for sometimes a general camping area. And so sometimes in dispersed camping on public lands, you'll see this is the camping area, and it's pretty easy to see where people have used that spot, that one, you go down the road, there's another little kind of carved out area. That doesn't mean that that's the only place you can go. It just means that that's the general camping area and they've been used before. The other thing in this definition sheet I put in is MVUM, and that is Motor Vehicle Use Map. And that's very helpful because you need to know that you can ask for that. Starting in about 2005, there were some new laws that were put into effect. And I don't think I understand the breadth of it completely, but there are certain things that are not available for motor vehicles. Now, since we're talking about boondocking, as it refers to having a trailer or an RV, we assume you got wheels under you. So if you have wheels, there are going to be places you can't go. There's going to be restrictions as to what you can do with a vehicle. So the motor vehicle use map will give you information on where your vehicle can go, which places are closed, maybe some things on current weather conditions, because camping in the summer in Texas is different than camping in October in Colorado. No problem.
Hit right here.
I have the same trouble. Sometimes I'm like, make it stop. It's probably your alarm telling you you're supposed to be here by now.
Yeah.
So the motor vehicle use map is going to be your guide to whatever is happening there. Now there are other things, but those are the things that I thought were the most important. Oh, I put in WMA because, yeah, I don't know why I'm nervous. I do this all the time, but I'm a little nervous. This is a hard subject. Maybe it's all the cameras. The WMA is the wildlife management areas because that's a place where a lot of people don't get to look. And that's kind of a general term that states use for lands that they use to protect wildlife. And they all have a little different name for them sometimes depending on what they're used for and which government entity is in charge of it. But it's something that you can Google for the state you're going in and try to find it. So does that help with what's boondocking? Because all it means is that you're not in a campground hooking up to all the amenities. So the biggest question is, how do you survive? And we'll talk about that because that's always the first, that's the two questions that are the biggest is, where do I go? How do I find a place to camp? And the other question is, how do I survive without water and electricity? Because that's the two things that campgrounds normally provide you with. So, if you go back to the first page, this is kind of a resource map. Again, we talked about boondocking, dispersed camping. This actually was from one of the government websites. I don't remember which one, but it gives you the basics on kind of some of the names of things of what they call them. BLM land is the Bureau of Land Management. BLM land is the most common place to boondock. We do not have BLM land in Texas. We don't have a lot of public land here. We do have some wildlife preserves, some things like that. There are some places in Texas that you can boondock, but we have very little public land here. So I always recommend that you go to the state parks and to the Google the WMA. You'll be able to see what's in Texas. Most of the people that boondock don't stay in Texas. They're traveling, they want to know, how do I get away? So here's some of the places that will give you the resources. There are some places on here where I actually included the websites where you can look. But your best bet in Texas is going to be looking at the state parks and the wildlife management, because that's the two areas that we actually do have a few places. The state parks, there are three, last time I looked, there are 3 state parks in Texas that do have some kind of general wildlife areas that are really good for boondocking. Most state parks, you'll pay to go in and you'll find a space. Speaking of paying to go in, a lot of people think of boondocking, they're talking about free camping. Well, there is some great free camping across the country, and if you ever want to find it, there's some websites, and I put some resources at the bottom. I think I put the, freecampsites.net. It's an interesting thing that happens with RVs. Have any of you guys decided you didn't want a hotel room and you went to one of the many sites where you can like rent a room at someone's house or things like that? I mean, kind of a bed and breakfast, but it's really a room at someone's house. You know, that's becoming much more common now. So my daughter actually worked for couch surfing for a while. And if you know anything about that, that was where you just sign up and you go stay on somebody's couch and you get to know someone. And it was really initially started as a cultural exchange. But I think that part of it is growing in America. So if you're looking for free camping, or maybe on someone's ranch land, the free campsites is kind of interesting. People just sign up and you can see locations and you contact them and say, I'm going to be in your area. I'm looking for someplace to stay. Well, you might have to go through a few gates and you might be out in the middle of a cow pasture or something. But they are people who have said, we will let you camp on our land. So I will say in Texas, that's probably one of the best resources you'll find. And sometimes it's 5 acres. Sometimes it's 150 acres. It's very cool. So, okay, so those are resources here. When you get outside of Texas, particularly if you go west or northwest, you'll find a lot of public land. There's a lot of public land on the East Coast. A lot of public land up in New York, Vermont, Maine. Beaches are very often public parking. Not so much in Texas, but up there. I'm getting a face. Are you not finding that to be true?
Oh, he's from New Jersey.
I'm from New Jersey.
Well, New Jersey is just different. Okay?
It's
I don't
special.
really remember a whole, I mean, there's lots of public land where we would, in my younger days, we would just pull off the side of the road and you'd take your backpack and go off,
Mm-hmm.
which you get shot in Texas doing that.
Yeah. Don't do
But-
that in Texas.
Yeah, but a lot of the Northeast is kind of like that with that state
Mhm.
parks, where, but I don't know about for campers. They're becoming more restricted, it seems like, in the national forests up there. They're
Mhm.
requiring, there used to be, you could just park and go off in the woods. Now you're gonna have to pay for something. They're saying yes, and I don't know, and that's just for backpacking things, not for particularly campers.
That's right.
So
That's right.
it's hit and miss, a little bit hit and miss there.
Yeah, I think that's right. And what's happened now is that there are, you know, in the last 20, 30 years from when we were kids, there's become regulations and rules and ranger stations, and you need to know the parameters, and they're different every place you go. So what I put together was just a basic idea of how you navigate that, because finding a place is absolutely the hardest part for most people.
I'd like to offer one suggestion. We've come in contact the last couple of years with an app called Backcountry Navigator. It has kind of a steep learning curve to it, but any place in the United States you can plot a map on your laptop or your tablet or something like that, and you can see where all the back roads are. It tells you the kind of back roads you have, for what kind of vehicle you have. It doesn't talk to you about that, but there are forestry trails that are gravel roads, and there are some that are just
Wonderfully paved roads, and you
wonderful
don't know the
paved road,
difference.
and in between, that type of thing. And what it and we predominantly spend our time in Colorado, where we got used to it. But I do know that it works all over the United States. There's a North American download, like there is, Canadian or even into Alaska, and it can point you in some. Of course, Colorado have a lot of public land as opposed to that. Haven't tried it out in Texas yet here to see what shows up. But it's,
And that's called Backcountry Navigator.
Navigator, yeah. It's a $10 app. I mean, for camping anyway, that's not a big deal.
And they try to update them, and I think places like that are a good place to start. The reason that I put where was it? There's a couple of them that I like. You can nowadays download Google Earth and satellite maps pretty easily and get information of where the roads are. But one of the more important things is to figure out what's happening right now. Because there could have been a rock slide, there could have been a washout. That part could be being rebuilt this season. It could have snowed at that level and you don't know it. So that's why when we're looking at how to locate a place, the first thing, I mean, you kind of need to think of that part as an adventure, because if you're planning on boondocking, it has to be an adventure, because it's not always going to be whatever you thought it was going to be, right? First thing you need to do is find the area you want to go to. Where do we want to stop? And let's say you pick an area, or you look at that Backcountry Navigator or whatever your favorite app is, and you say, well, we're heading this way. There's this national forest here. Let's see if we can boondock in this national forest. So you've got to have an idea of where you're going. Now, I did put on here when I put locating a dispersed camp spot. It really depends on what your vehicle is. If you're a truck camper, our truck camper guys go all kinds of places. You can run a truck camper up a logging road. If you're a 30-foot motorhome, not so much. So sometimes it's real difficult to tell with a map where you can go. If you have a small trailer, you have a lot more options. So the first thing is, it varies on what you have. But the second thing I said is contact a public lands administrator for the area you want to go to. And that sounds a little vague, but there's so many different kinds of land to go to. So if you want to go to public land, is it a national forest? Is it a Bureau of Land Management, a BLM land? Figure out where the is. So you can kind of get an idea of the area by stopping at the ranger station or whatever their local area is. They will have something near the entrance that will give you that information. And everyone is different. So the two questions you need to ask is for the vehicle map. What do I call it? I never remember the name of it. The MVUM. That will tell you, where can I drive? Where can I not drive? A lot of the national forests can change. They can, the map that they printed 3 months ago may have changed. So you always want to try to get there during the day so you can talk to somebody. Now, I will tell you my theory of remote camping is when I first get there, if I'm going to stay longer than 1 day, I'm not looking for the very best remote camping spot ever. I'm looking for a jump-off point. I'm looking for a base camp so that I can park and then maybe explore after that. And I might move my campsite the second night if I'm going to stay there a week. But very often you're not getting there first thing in the morning. And it might take 3 or 4 hours of wandering to find the best spot. So think about whether you want to find a home base and look around, or whether you think that you can locate the best spot ever. The best thing to ask is for your motor vehicle map so you can see where you can drive, and then ask for the approved camping areas. A lot of times they will say, this is where most of the camping is, right here. And as I said, a lot of times when I get there, I see that there is sometimes 1 or 2, sometimes a handful, sometimes more areas that you can see people have camped there. So sometimes you can find a great place before you get there, and you're like, whoa, what about that? Well, there's a road there. Well, can we drive on it? Well, let me see. Oh yeah, we can. It's open. Now if we turn left, the ranger told us it was closed, or the stream flooded it out, or whatever. So once you get armed with enough information, you can head for the general camping area, see what you see on the way there. If you have time, if it is 9 o'clock in the morning and you're feeling adventurous, go exploring and see what you can see. A lot of times it just takes some work. The other thing to ask the ranger is about the rules and regulations of that particular camping area. They are always, always different. I would love to give you the rules for that place, but they're all different. Generally, the rules include something like don't camp within 100 to 150 feet to 200 feet from any water source. Generally, they say don't drive off the beaten path. Generally, they will say pets need to be under control. They may have water dumping restrictions. They may have fire restrictions. I always recommend that you ask about a fire, because guess what? Boondockers love fires. It's true. So, you need to know, first of all, if they're allowed. If you're in Texas, we're used to fire restrictions, right? But if you go and find a boondocking spot in Texas, ask them what's allowed. They'll say, well, if it's in a container, and it's no more than this feet wide and that feet tall, it's okay. Or they might say, not a single spark anywhere. Or they may say, these campgrounds can have a fire, these campgrounds can't. Until you ask at that local station, you don't know. So getting away from everybody requires talking to people. So keep that in mind. It's difficult to look for a good boondocking spot as the sun's going down when you just arrive. So plan for some adventure there. Another thing that I think is a good tip if you're trying to find a good location, there's several topography maps that you can get online. There's apps. If you want to really explore and you are not in turf that you know, if you download that, you can kind of see the lay of the land. Because this road may look 3 miles long, but it might be straight up or straight down or like this. And so if you get the topography of a land, you can kind of get an idea of what type of land you'll be looking at. It helps to pick a spot that would work for you and that you want to navigate. You may want to be out in the fields and watch the birds, or you may want to be on a mountaintop and have the scenery. So that's always helpful too. You know, unfortunately, boondocking just takes a little bit of homework to find a great spot. And once you find a great area, so many people end up going back to the same area again. And they'll plan a trip to stop at that one great place on their way to the next great place. So I think, personally, I think everybody should try boondocking. And when I ask people why they don't, when I get a camper back in and it has 3 hours on a generator that this guy absolutely had to have 2 years ago, and I say, why? They said, we just didn't know where to go. Well, I get it. That's the hard part. So, do a little bit of homework. Let me see. I do put on my list of how to find a spot. If you find an area and you have any questions, check back in with the ranger station. Because, you know, sometimes I don't get all the information before I get there. And I get there and I'm like, I think this is an okay spot, but, you know, and he may say, that's a great spot, but if it rains, it's going to flood. I mean, that kind of information is good to know. Yeah, and so the last thing I put is find a spot, and if it's not your absolute favorite, explore. Most boondockers don't set up huge, elaborate campsites. They get their chairs out, they find some, maybe a little bit of shade, you know, got a few things going, set up their solar panel, but you're not really setting up for the 3-week July 4th party. So moving isn't that big of a deal. Okay, I think we beat that dead horse. Is everybody, do you feel like you could go out and find a campsite now? Could you at least have enough resources to look for something where you're going? Would you know where to start? Would you be comfortable going out there and finding a spot? Did I give you enough information? Or do you know?
Well, I think what we see is that you're talking about the rangers. Most towns of any size usually have a visitor center or an information center, and they can be a wealth of information to stop in. Say, I'm a Class A camper only, just like what you're saying. Do your homework, but that's a place to go to. We find that the rangers locations that we have talked to, they have a lot of information, but they hand you these 14,000 brochures. They go read. You know, you talk to an information center, they're more apt to give you some direct information for their respective area. Another way, like in a lot of forestry campgrounds in Colorado, then they all have camp hosts. If you just stay there for one night while you're trying to sort out what you want to do, you have access to usually a camp host. They'll tell you everything in the world because they're lonely people there. They're all
right.
So
but you touched on a really good point. Sure. You need to tell them, this is what I have and here's what I'm looking for. Yeah. Because if you have a 40-foot motorhome, you're going to have some reasonably flat land. You're not going to be able to navigate the switchbacks. And I have found most motorhome, larger vehicle people do really well in national forests, because national forests have generally good roads, but they still have areas that are remote enough to feel like you're out of the way and without amenities. So yeah, but you're right, visitor centers, any place you can ask.
Sure.
Public land is the most popular, so always a good place. And rangers do hand you a lot, so ask exactly what you want to know. Here's what I got, here's where I want to be.
All right, I have probably a silly question, but we read a lot of people are, when you're traveling to a destination, you need to stop. And Walmart wouldn't work for us. We don't have a full rec. We have just a simple rec. So what is the rule about rest areas?
Oh.
I thought Texas was okay for us, but ours has to be popped up because we have the A-frame. So we aren't like we can pull in and just act like we're just parked there. We actually look like we're popped up. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's not as bad as the
well, so do the motorhomes with the generator
canvas
running.
is coming out the ends, but you know, close enough.
And here's what I recommend there. Walmarts are a good place. Large areas like that are a good place. However, not all of them allow overnight camping. And the only way you're going to know is to call them or to walk in and ask them. That's the only way you'll know.
I didn't know if it was easier to go to the Walmart, which is pretty noisy in itself, or to stop on the rest area on the side of the road. I mean, our experience coming back into Texas was off I-10. I don't know if anybody has ever come into Texas.
What a horrible
I-10,
road.
coming back to Austin, and we were dog tired, and we stopped in Ozona, and we couldn't find a friggin' place to stop. And we
Yeah.
were looking for an RV park. We've done the, hey, we just want to pop in. We don't want anything but your electric. And a lot of times they've made deals for us. They've
Sure.
given us a spot for $10, $15, which is good enough because we don't need full hookups.
Especially if it's later at night and
Exactly.
they know
We
they're
got
not
into
going to
this
get anybody
place,
else.
And it's an oil town, so there's
Uh-huh.
nobody in any of the RV parks. We're driving around, we're going,
Uh-huh.
where's the friggin' office?
Yeah.
The only place we got was a hotel and no facilities. So for us,
Uh-huh.
it really sucked because we need a bathroom.
Uh-huh.
I mean, hello.
Mm-hmm.
We don't got one with the trailer, so it was kind of like what. So we were almost like torn between: do we just go down the road and park on the side of the road, pop it up, and hang out? I mean, because I don't want to be arrested or have to worry about some.
Well, I mean, that's always a dilemma. Because there's not public land everywhere, you can't just pull off and park. You can't just pull into some farmer's field. That's trespassing.
I think you can, if you're at a rest stop on the highway, in fact, at the free the website, the freecampsites.com.
So you're one of those that
Actually,
Googles as we're talking.
Yeah, actually, it has a number of those places on here. As
In
places
Texas?
In Texas. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it will
So I
tell you
always
the
thought
places that will
full
allow it.
outfitted ones would be the ones that would be the safest ones. I mean, they have everything.
They have a
Mhm.
restroom. Yeah.
Some of them even
some
have
of them-
Wi-Fi.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
Some of them are listed.
yeah.
And I've heard that all rest areas in Texas,
Or-
you can camp overnight.
Unless
park.
unless it says, unless there's a sign that says no overnight camping. And there are some that do say that. So if it doesn't say that, you are probably fine.
Okay.
Good.
I will also tell you in Ozona there's a truck stop, and it may not be your favorite camping, but it's relatively safe and it's free. And they
That
expect
would
you
have
to
been
be
fine
there.
for us because all we wanted to do is open it, eat, sleep.
Yes, and there's
Where we
bathrooms
ended
and
up in
there's
Ozona was
And maybe
food.
use the bathroom.
awful.
Yes. So if you're looking for a travel through,
Yeah.
truck stops are good. And there's a ton of truck stop apps. Because if you want kind of full service place to sleep, that's a great place to be. Rest stops work. That free camping site has a lot of good free places, and that's really good for just simply getting from here to there.
Well, you know how big our state is. I mean,
Mhm.
we leave from here and you want, okay, we're going to go to Colorado. It's going to take us 10-hour drive.
Yeah.
We got to stop
Yeah.
somewhere.
You have to
before
stop
we get
somewhere.
to where we want to be.
So free camping is kind of in between boondocking and
Yeah.
Yeah.
full service.
Right.
You know, it's kind of the travel part of it. But most big businesses don't mind. And if it's a 24-hour place like a Walmart, just walk in and ask them, and they will say yes or no. And most of the time, they will tell you. If they say no, they will tell you the nearest place to go. They will say no, but you can go right down here.
Okay.
So there's a couple of apps that you can get that will fix that problem for you, because
Okay.
all of those are good stopover places. They're not really good camping places
No.
usually.
I mean, a lot of times
But they're good
it's not that
stopovers.
because we were treating our trailer as a hotel room.
That's
I
right.
mean, who wants to spend $100 to just sleep in a bed in a hotel that you're not going to do anything in, right? You're
Well-
just like, ooh, it's like 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, that's
So
why a
just-
lot of people have trailers and RVs.
Yeah.
I just need a place to sleep while I'm traveling. So then if you want to have some fun once you get to Colorado, you can boondock, because there's a lot of land out there that you can just live on.
And regardless of where you're camping, be a good camper and clean up after yourself. And
We'll talk about that.
Oh, okay.
I'm not letting anybody off the hook without that, because I don't think you can ever not talk about that enough.
So on these public lands, is there a limit of stay?
There is always a limit of stay, and it depends on what type of public land you're on, what type of national forest, BLM land, any of it. There's always limits, and that's another thing to ask the ranger. What's this? Some land requires you to not stay any more than one night in the same place. Most land has a certain amount of limits before you have to move. And when you move, you have to move a certain number of miles down the road. So that's a very good question, because that's an important question to ask. So to recap, when you talk to your ranger, anything I need to know about the weather, where I can't go, any suggestions, fire, and length of stay, and here's my rig, here's what I'm looking for. And most of the time they can be pretty helpful. Occasionally you get somebody who hands you a bunch of pamphlets, but
They
but
usually will answer
even them.
very specific questions.
Yes, so be specific when you ask, because, hey, I'd like to go camping. What are they supposed to do with that? You know? That can mean a lot of things to different people. You also want the motor vehicle map, so that you will be able to get that schematic. And because the general guide for the forest may not be what you're looking for. And if you're in more remote places, they will know what you're talking about. They'll be armed and dangerous, ready to get you where you want to go. All right, so if we all feel like we could find our way around, let's talk about the actual camping. Because if you're brave enough to find a place, now you have to be brave enough to stay there for however long without having the amenities that we're used to at your fingertips. Biggest one, what does everybody worry about when they're boondocking?
Water.
Water. Water, 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 water. Well, first tip is do not drive 500 miles with a full tank of water. I don't recommend it. Unless you have a huge rig that's not going to notice 500 pounds of water. Smaller rigs, just not good for you to drive with that much water. You know, water weighs a little over 8 pounds a gallon. And so everybody says, well, I only filled it halfway full. Well, you know what that halfway full is going to do? Just wait till you get close, stop, fill up with water when you get there, and say, all right, I got a full tank. You have to gauge how much you have. Right? How much water do I have? Well, and what am I going to use it for? Am I going to be there 2 days, or am I going to be there a week, or do I want to try to like be 3 weeks in the wilderness and, you know, learn what it's like to be a caveman? Who knows? I mean, you might have, whatever your agenda is, water is what you have to plan for the most, water and food. So with water, I tried to list 2 things on here. The second thing didn't list very well. The one thing you need to worry about is drinking water. You will always want more drinking water than you have. You will always think you don't have enough. Plan for drinking water accordingly. And most people will carry a little bottled water. If you want to stay out and you want to be boondocking for a week, you might want a couple of the 5-gallon drinking water tubs and just use it for drinking. Drinking water is totally separate from everything else when you're off the grid. So they make wonderful little things you could fill up stream water with it and create, what did it say? That little bitty thing is like, it's $20 and it does up to 100 liters of fresh water. You can dunk that in a stream and create drinkable water.
Is it reusable?
Well, yeah, up to about 100 liters.
No, I mean, when you 100 liters and then it's no good.
Yeah,
Is that what
then you
said?
pay another $20
Okay.
and get another one.
No, I just.
Yeah, I see. Do you replace a cartridge or something?
Right.
No, it's little.
And you gotta be on your hands and knees. to get
It's a
that.
straw.
It's a straw. It's a life straw.
Yeah.
It's about this big.
Yeah.
We
But
actually have.
you just drink out of the stream.
And
It's
you
a-
can
it's a
get-
straw, like a straw.
It's kind of
Okay.
a glass.
I thought it would give you
Yeah.
100 liters at a time.
But
is
if you
what
go
I-
hiking and you're really, no, it doesn't
There's
like
also
create
pumps.
water.
I mean, if you're a backpacker,
Mhm.
you would
Yeah.
be pumping
Yeah,
your
pumps.
water and filling
This-
up
You can have
a
ones-
Nalgene.
The second
ones
one
with
creates a
fill-
tub of water.
Fill and then a gravity feed, which will filter your water.
Yeah, they make
And
they
the
make
sun.
bigger ones.
So
But if you're boondocking, you know, the life straws are so easy because
Yep.
you know,
And viruses.
if you're there and you run out of water, you can get a drink, or if you go backpacking or hiking, you can have larger containers too, but they get up in the $75 to $100 plus. But you know what? If you're going to be a boondocker, it's a great thing to have because nobody cares if you don't take a shower. But you're going to get thirsty. Okay, she might care if you don't take a shower.
But
No one
after
else
3
will.
days, you're gonna want to be able to drink water.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not gonna be doing too good. It won't, shower won't matter.
Yeah, and you know what I find is that as human beings, the things that we're unsure of is what we worry about. So get to whatever level you need to be comfortable so you don't worry. The more you do it, the less you'll worry. But start out with enough gear so that if the world falls apart, you'll have drinking water and won't have to drive what could be 2 or 3 hours back to civilization to buy water. Okay? Let's talk about how to use water. I have 2 listings here. One's water, one's wastewater. If you have gone through a walkthrough with me, buying a new camper, my instructions to you will be do not skimp on toilet water. Because we are taught to conserve water, we want to not use very much so our holding tank doesn't fill up, right? You don't skimp on water. Why? Because all the solids drop to the bottom of this usually very thin tank, and then the water runs off, and it can't break down. So you end up with solids in your tank. So you don't skimp on water that way because you want it to all be covered in water and have all of the formaldehyde-free, which you all use, I'm sure, chemical to disintegrate it all. All right? When you're boondocking, you have to manage your water, so you have to know what your level is. All right? If I will talk about obviously if nothing solid is going in your tank, you're not going to use a lot of water for flushing the toilet. I highly recommend this. If you're boondocking, you're in the middle of nowhere usually, there's not a soul around, dig a hole. And we will talk about how to do that. I know that's always a great topic, but it's part of it. The object of the game is so that, do you want to go to a campsite that has a grody leftover campfire and a little bit of messy piles over here, kind of smelly, it looks like animals have been rooting around? That's what happens when you don't take good care of the environment. So a lot of this is just kind of wilderness camping backpacker rules. But managing your water, if you are not putting anything solid in your toilet, you got a lot more options, right?
Managing your water can be also accomplished by, if you're boondocking with a trailer, you're probably going to be next to a stream or in the vicinity of a stream. And carry a little 5-gallon plastic bag that now you can go to a stream and get water that you can use specifically for your toilet needs instead of trying to haul it along on the tanks that they have in a camper.
Yes, definitely you can. Now, and in last ditch resort, that would work. There are streams though that aren't very nice water.
They're not clean.
Yeah, they're not clean.
But I mean, those
so last ditch effort, absolutely.
Well, I wouldn't even call it last ditch effort, but you know you can judge that when you get to the streams. I mean, you're not going to go to the Colorado River in Texas and take a bag of water out of there.
Yeah.
And you would see that right away. You would know.
That's
that.
right.
Okay.
And another way to manage your water, since you brought that up, is if you have a rig that has gray water and black water, your gray water is very reusable. So one of the things I always suggest you take when you're boondocking is a bucket. Just a regular old small mop bucket. They even make collapsible buckets. They work great. They do fine. They're flat as a board, and you just pop them up. They become a bucket. You can actually drain your gray water into the bucket and use that to flush your toilet.
I have a collapsible dish pan, and I will just wash my dishes in that, and then I will use that. I don't even have to go out and recycle it. I just pour that
To flush the toilet. Now, most public land will not want you to dump any water at all. And they may say that in their rules that they give you, because they'll give you a packet of rules. Soapy water doesn't necessarily hurt the ground if you're dumping out this much that you washed your dishes with. If you're unloading your gray tank, whole nother story. So, limit what goes on the ground, but soapy water is fine. I have known people who generally carry bleach because they feel like the outside is so unsanitary. They want to be sure everything gets real clean. Bleach is one of the most, hello, welcome, come on in. It's one of the most damaging things. So do not use bleach when you're boondocking. Just leave it at home. Leave all the Mr. Clean and all of that at home as much as you can. A little mild detergent will do everything you need to do in the wilderness, and it's the least harmful product. Let's see. Water. Any other questions on water? Water's going to be your number one concern. Everybody got the idea on water. It's pretty simple. Let's talk about food, because that's the other thing. You got to have food. We're used to being able to run up to the store. There's a lot of things that make us nervous. What's the best way to have food when you boondock?
Easy beforehand.
Yes. Freezing, I think, is one of the easiest ways to have full meals. Now, if you want to cook over a campfire, that's awesome. Most of the time it's going to require some water. You're going to have some water to do that. So be sure you have some water if you're going to like cook beans or, you know, rehydrate something or boil potatoes or whatever you need to do. Keep the water in mind. But canned food or frozen food, or simply basic food that doesn't need refrigeration. Potatoes, beans, rice. They make great meals when you're camping. And you know, you're hungrier when you're camping than when you're at home. I don't know how that works, but I'm always hungrier. So I don't mind big, hearty meals when I'm camping, because I'm hungry. I've probably done a lot more walking, a lot more moving around than I did when I was home. So plan that way. I really like frozen food, especially frozen food that when it thaws is very close to what you want it to be. Which means soups, stews. I put something on here about like sloppy Joe type food, because you know, even if you didn't have a fire was restricted, and you didn't really want to light up a camp stove or something, then room temperature food is just fine. Room temperature soup is not the worst thing ever. So it gives you a lot more options that way. Freezing your food, planning your meals by freezing them, and then having alternatives that you could cook, and ready to eat. There's always the ready to eat backpacker style food. Good things for that. Of course, we all have our nuts and raisins and trail mix, things like that. It's always good. I like to make things beforehand that I can take. I like to make my own granola mix or some type of bars, because I usually want something I can just pick up in my hand and snack on. You know, if you're busy and this is your getaway and you're not doing that, then just as you cook your meals for 2 weeks before you go camping, just cook a little extra and put it in a Ziploc bag, use a freezer bag, put it in the freezer, and pack up your frozen food. Running RVs, most RVs will have a refrigerator that'll run on gas. You always want to run on gas, you're not going to have electric. If you have a refrigerator that can run on 12 volt, you don't want to use that when you're boondocking, because your battery is what controls your refrigerator. It controls your furnace. It turns the lights on. It is necessary for many of the functions of your camper. What you don't have when you're boondocking is you don't have an air conditioner and you don't have a microwave. If you conserve your battery and your propane, you've got everything else. Everything else is available to you. For boondockers, I think that it's good to talk about having a small portable camp stove with its own propane on it, because you can always bundle up in the sleeping bag if you don't have heat, you know? So what if your frozen food thaws? If you have a little camp stove, you can continue on pretty well if you've got a camp stove and some water. You've got a lot of options there. Plus, if you're boondocking, I find it really nice not to have to camp in or near the trailer. I mean, cook in or near the trailer. I do camp near the trailer. So, sorry. But I could take my little camp stove over there, and I could camp over there. I mean, cook over there, whatever. So you get the idea. Any good ideas that I haven't? Oh, they also have some great new solar cooking stoves out now. If you are interested in that, you should look them up. They're very cool. Some of them, you put food in it and you put it in there and it rotates. Some of them are more like a hot box. But you can put food in there in the morning, and by the nighttime, if you're in a sunny climate, your food's cooked. It can take anywhere from 2 to 6 or 7 hours to cook food, but you're not doing anything but putting it in this box and setting it out. Kind of cool. So if you're not in bear country, that's a great alternative. If you're in bear country, not so much. All right, any other ideas on food? Anything I didn't talk about that you guys know about that might be helpful?
There are some outstanding recipes online for making a complete meal in foil. And you can cook it while you're home or when you've got electricity or propane or, you know, you're hooked up somewhere. And then when you go out, and then you just freeze them, and then whenever you get to wherever you're going, you've got a whole meal in foil, and it just has to be warmed up.
Well, that's a good idea, because that would work on a campfire
Or
a
you
stove.
can even set it out in the sun, as long as there aren't varmints around it. You know,
Right.
that is something you have to keep in mind, but we have found that to work really good.
Another suggestion is make sure you have a good ice chest, because even if you're, you know, you can keep ice, or at least stuff cold for several days. You've got a good ice chest. And
Yeah,
it gives
you
you a
know,
lot of additional space over your refrigerator.
That's so true. The Yeti is a great thing, and there are so many alternatives that are just like the Yeti, that are sometimes lower price, different name brands with all the same technology. And for those of you that don't know, you can put some ice and some frozen foods in there, and 4 or 5 days later, you've still got frozen food, and it's not using a bit of energy. So that's a good suggestion. And I think putting things in foil is a great suggestion too, because that you can cook lots of different ways and not have to get it out of the plastic bag, and it just heats up the way it is.
Well, you can
Great
also,
for fires.
You can also almost eat out of them if you open them up.
Well, and anytime you don't have to use a pan to cook something in, you don't have to clean it, so it saves water. Speaking of saving, I had a little blurb in the paperwork that I gave you about paper plates. It is very, and this is probably more personal than anything. That's why I was surprised to see Solo cups here tonight. I'm sure Clint was being very helpful and picked up some cups, or we may have some left over from a rally where we can't take our cups.
Sorry.
It's all fine. But you'll notice if you come here that we don't have styrofoam coffee cups. We don't have paper cups. We generally don't use paper plates because it's easy to wash dishes. And I recommend, if you carry a stack of paper plates, it seems like a good idea when you go boondocking. But then you have a whole stack of paper goods and a giant trash bag. So part of boondocking is limiting your trash. So I find it easier to use plastic dishes. I take a little bitty napkin or what do they call those? Paper towels. And just use that to wipe. One can wipe all your dishes, clean out the big pieces, and then just stack them there until maybe you have more to do than just one. So that tub of soapy water does a lot of things. You know, I have been known to wash the dishes, because I wipe them off so they're not food particles or anything, and I wash the dishes, and then maybe rinse out a rag that I'm going to use to wipe down something else we used, and then maybe clean the mud off the bottom of my tennis shoes, all with the same bucket of water. So once you start thinking like that, you'll find out what tricks work for you. But there's my plug. Paper plates and cups just create a lot of trash.
And that's something you have to worry about getting rid of when you're out boondocking.
Yes, and we will talk about all those interesting things in just a minute. Electricity.
When he was mentioning about the ice chest, it's something that's minute, but afterwards it helps out a lot. Is if you can find racks or separators for your ice chest to keep some goods up above versus just having everything at the bottom, because your ice is going to melt. And what I've come across is sometimes I'll put vegetables or some fruits in there, then the ice melts and there's just water all over the place. And then it may get in some containers as well. So having a rack where you can put some of those items on top and then all of your sealed containers at the bottom, that works wonders.
Oh, that's interesting.
And freeze your water in plastic milk jugs so that when it does melt,
Yeah, that's
you still have water to use either as drinking or as
Oh, that's a great
whatever,
tip.
and it doesn't get into your stuff.
yeah.
I think I might be tempted to, I've never tried it, but you could take, you know, the regular bottles of water and just freeze them, put them in the bottom of your ice chest, put your food on top, and then you've got drinking water. Ah, great idea.
You don't remember.
Keep thinking.
Also remember, don't listen to what the company says.
Yeah.
Igloo says they have this cooler that we bought 7 days, guaranteed.
Not in Texas.
But it
It's
wasn't
not
in Texas. It
guaranteed
might have
for
been
Texas.
Alaska, but it wasn't Texas because we tried it in the summer and we got maybe 3 days out of it. And they said, oh, well, did you have pre-frozen food? Did you have that cooler in the house before in a chilled
Did you
area
have
before
solid
you
blocks
actually
of ice
used
in
it?
it?
How big were the ice?
How many
They-
times did you open it?
How many times did you open it? So
We only use ours to do
believe,
drinks
Don't believe what the
Water.
advertisers say.
and stuff.
Well, there are some that are really good.
You know,
Yeah.
we haven't tried
we-
Yeti yet, but
Well, we had a Yeti that we were giving away. It wasn't a Yeti, it was an off-brand. And we took it to our last tiny trailer rally. And the problem was the office would always close and we wouldn't have enough ice for whatever our event was for that night. So we thought we were really smart, and as a reserve, we put 3 bags of ice in it and closed it and put it in the corner, thinking, okay, now we'll have it because we always run out. Well, that ice chest got forgotten for 4 days, and then it got brought home, and on the 5th day, we still had 4 bags of ice in it. It was like, silly us. So I was impressed. It didn't go a week, but it did go almost 4 full days.
But then again,
But it was
wasn't
never
and
opened.
again, it was inside.
That's right.
In
But
the
if you're
shade.
traveling, and that
Yeah.
is your frozen food section,
It's
you know,
just
you're,
a matter of where you store it in your vehicle also.
if the sun's beating
you
down
have-
on it.
If you want to have some kind of silvery
Mhm.
stuff to put around the outside instead of, because we have a Coleman that they give you a black cover that goes on top of it.
Oh, what are they
That doesn't
thinking?
make very much sense.
No.
It's the silver one, metal Coleman, that you would think that they would give you a cover that's a little more reflective.
No.
So,
But
yeah.
black draws heat,
So-
so we were
Maybe
going,
black's
wow,
better
this
than
is
the
not gonna be
aluminum,
good
I don't
if you
know.
leave it in the sun. It can get
Right.
hot.
Well, all good ideas. Anything else that we can think of with food, water, storage, boondocking? All right, electricity. If you're boondocking, you don't have electricity for some period of time. The first thing is, how long is that period of time, right? Because you can go one night no problem. We've all camped in our driveways and not plugged in, and if you haven't, you should try it. So, in the winter, of course, if you live in Texas, because the summer's just miserable. So, where do we get that energy? Like we talked about before, batteries and propane can run everything on your camper or trailer except the air conditioner and the microwave. So if you're boondocking in cool weather, you have it made. Now, that's my normal saying, but I have now learned to add in, you know those little 110 plugs like your house has? Those don't work either. Because those are only working when you plug in and you have what we now call house current. Those 110 plugs don't work either. So your toaster oven's not going to work if you plug it in that way. If you have a 110 coffee pot, it's not going to work. If you have a hairdryer that you absolutely have to have, then you have no business boondocking. So at any rate, that's the things to think about, is what you don't need. That's what you don't need. Coffee, lots of alternatives. There's lots of people who can't live without coffee. And if you've never tried a French press, give it a shot, it's wonderful. I mean, there's a million ways around the coffee part. So the next piece of that is, what do you need? The thing that's going to use the most propane is going to be your furnace for most people. Your furnace and then your refrigerator. Both of those need to run on propane. You do not want your refrigerator running on 12 volt. Why?
Battery will away.
Battery will go away really quick. If your battery goes away, it makes it really difficult to get everything running. Nothing can run even if it runs on gas. That is a common mistake a lot of people make. Well, I thought the water heater was gas. Well, it is. But you need the battery to tell it to turn on. So almost nothing runs without the battery. So that is why solar is so important when you're talking boondocking. Now, the hard part about solar has really been alleviated for a lot of people. You can always mount solar panels on the roof, and that's a good way to get solar when you're going down the road, good way to get solar in a lot of areas. But if you're any place that has trees, you're going to have to find a space that's not under the trees. So, boondocking, if you have solar on the top, it's excellent. If you don't, my recommendation is to look at one of the portable panels. Zamp was the first company to do it. And why is that so cool? I think these are really cool. Now it's going to sound like a commercial, but what I really want to do is just help you understand it. Solar power has to have a controller. You have to control the amount of power that's going in there. So the portables were always a problem, because then you had to hook up something in between to control that solar going into your battery. Zamp said, no you don't, we'll just build it in. So in the back, there's a controller built into the back of these portable solar panels. So all you need to do is connect this to your camper. You do not need anything special. If you have a plug on the side for a portable solar panel, which a lot of the small trailers have if it's newer, then this piece here, actually, you can just unplug it right here. See if my hands will work. And plug that into your camper. But if you don't, then you just put this little piece on the end and you clip it onto your batteries. It's that easy. I bet everybody here can jump a car. I mean, this is the same thing. You just clip it on and this charges your battery. So it can go anywhere it needs to go. It can go outside of where you're camping. You can park in the shade and put this in the sun, which if you're camping in Texas, that is invaluable. Or you can set it right next to your camper. Some of the questions we get on portable solars are, what if somebody steals it? Well, if you're boondocking, probably nobody's going to steal it. But if you're worried about it, get one of those steel cables like they use to lock up bikes and just lock it to your camper. They do make wonderful little motion detector things that if somebody picks it up, this horrible noise goes off. You know, they're just, in my mind, totally overrated. You can find, you can also, if you're putting this pretty far away, you can get a bicycle chain, loop it there and lock it, loop the other side and lock it, a way to keep it. I think you'll find that it's not something a lot of people are going to be running off with, even if you're in a campground, especially in a campground, because guess what? There is like a whole bunch of people watching. If you're boondocking, you know, gosh, there's always a chance. But you know, there's always a chance somebody's going to steal your car. So you can lock it up and be safe with a bike chain. But I think those are invaluable for boondocking because you're going to need power.
Chain your dog to the
Yeah.
and nobody else.
There you go.
Chain your dog there. Yeah.
Make
Poor
sure
dog.
it's vicious dog though.
So how many watts is that?
Oh, good question. This is an 80-watt solar panel.
Okay, is that feed enough to the battery?
This will charge in one day. It will almost fully charge a Group 24 deep cycle marine battery. If you have 2 batteries, then you could go bigger if you were using a lot of energy. Most
What if
people,
you're just using your 3-way refrigerator and maybe the heater at night, and maybe the LED occasionally? How long
Well-
would your battery last in that situation? And how often would you need to hook that up?
good question, and it's hard to say exactly. But I would say, first of all, LED lights. If you don't have LED lights, then you need to get them. You can replace bulbs and regular light bulbs with LEDs. LEDs use 1/100th of the energy that a regular light bulb has. So if you don't have LEDs, you just need to buy the bulbs and put them in your camper, because then that takes the light bulbs out of the equation. They don't use enough to even count.
A lot of them 4 days on one of those, watching TV and everything, just don't have air conditioning.
Yeah, we just went.
On
we
80
went
watt.
I have
On
plenty-
80
I always
watt,
had
just
power.
using the 80 watt during the day?
No, they're
So
talking
you
about
want-
just on their battery.
Yeah, just a battery. We
Oh,
just-
with no
we went 4
replacement.
days with just that, and I watched TV
Without the solar
Okay.
panel.
with the solar panel.
With
Oh,
the
with
solar
the
So
solar.
without the solar panel, I don't think my battery would have done that.
So we went. We were just in Big Bend, and we went 3.5 days without anything.
Just the battery.
Just the battery. Like,
Mhm.
we were
Oh,
just
and our
running the
refrigerator
refrigerator
comes in,
yeah.
and the heat pump once in a while.
Okay.
And the lights.
That's it?
That's it.
And it lasted 3 days, no problem.
The
So
furnace
that would
Yeah.
extend it, no problem.
Now, the question I have is, we read something about you don't want your battery to drain down all the way.
Okay,
Yeah.
that was my
It's
second
not-
question.
It's not good.
How do you
for it. There
ruin
was
the
something
battery?
on one of the forums about it. Would you comment on that?
I will, but I will tell you, when we have our tech talks at our rallies, it's almost become a comic relief, because the question isn't if we'll talk about batteries, it's how long we'll talk about batteries. Because everybody has ideas and opinions, and there's a lot of different things to talk about with batteries. So, if we're talking about marine batteries, which are Group 24 deep cycle marine batteries, it's a different animal than a car battery. Car batteries are not meant to not have any charge on them over and over. And it makes it harder for them to recharge. Deep cycle marine batteries were created for boats probably in the beginning and RVs as time went on, because they very often get completely discharged. So the question is it good for them? I wouldn't say it's good for them, no.
Is it bad for
Is it as bad as it is for a car battery? No. They're meant to be run down and run up again. So, would I worry if it got discharged down to nothing? No. It will come back. But here are some things that may be more helpful to you in that arena. And one is, most people, until they get experienced, don't know that a lot of their problems are caused by their battery not being strong enough. So, if you have a maintenance battery and you have a dry cell and your battery's dead, you think, I'll just put water in it. And you might even take it to a local AutoZone or a Walmart and say, test this battery. They'll put it on there. They'll say, oh, it's fine. You put it in there. 2 hours after you start camping, your battery's dead, and you're going, oh, something's wrong with my camper. Well, something could be wrong with your camper. However, more than likely, your battery tests just fine until you put a load on it. Because when RV batteries get tired, they might look okay until you start using it, and then they drop like a rock. So, if you have a dry cell, you need to be aware that you may not come back if you've abused your battery. If it simply gets run down and you recharge it, it's not something I would do every day. Run it until it's dead and recharge it. It does take some life out of the battery, but not nearly what some people say it does. And there are AGM batteries that people can use instead of maintenance batteries. Whole nother topic of discussion, but they're out there. They're very expensive. Do they last longer? Do they make it better? They're simply easier. Unless your battery is in a very difficult place to get to, I wouldn't say go run out and buy one of those. Just check the water in your battery every now and then. Put distilled water in it. If it goes dead, recharge it. But a good RVer, particularly a boondocker, needs to be aware of where your battery is and try to keep it at a reasonable amount. Because once it drops too low, it can't turn on the furnace or do anything else. If you have a generator on your camper, most big truck campers will have a generator. Most small trailers don't. Most medium-sized trailers don't. But if you have a generator, a lot of people say, well, I'll just start up my generator, provide that house current, and that actually trickle charges your battery. The problem is, if you're boondocking, you cannot start the generator if you don't have enough battery power. So, I don't know that anybody here is in that situation, but in boondocking, you just need to check your battery levels if you're counting on that. Because if you're using your generator, at some point you can't use your generator. That's when you hook up your portable solar panel till it comes up, and then you've got all the options back. There are several sizes of this. This is the 80 watt. A question that we'll get is the price. It's $570. Folds in half, it's thin, it's easy to carry. They make a 40 watt, give you about a half a battery charge. You know, if you're not using it much or you just want to be sure it's charged up enough before you leave, it would be fine for at home or something like that. I recommend going with the 80 or above. They make, I think, a 120, a 160, and a 200. The 200 probably is twice that size, so it's pretty big. But that 200 charges very fast, and I mean, if you've got two group 24 batteries on your trailer, and you have a 200 watt charger, you're gonna have a really hard time running out of battery. So, mounting it permanently or using a portable, it's just become kind of a no-brainer when all of that is so accessible.
So is that a panel on the back side of that thing telling you whether or not your battery is charged? Because that was the other question we were going to ask, is how do we know what charges on the battery? Because our camper did not come with any indicator that tells us what our battery is.
some kind of inline voltmeter for the battery.
Yeah. Without being expensive.
We bought 120 from you last year. We used it
Mhm.
4 times this year. On that controller on the back side, it's got 4 little LED windows, empty, quarter, half, 3/4, and full. And
Okay.
it visually shows you.
So it tells you on that thing
On
what
that
the
particular
battery
design,
is. So
no.
you don't have to worry about it. You can just see that it's full
Yeah.
and it's done its job.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, you'll see where it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
They also make, I mean, they make other things you can clip on and see what energy is in your battery. But if you have a solar panel, it makes it a little easier. If you're not going to be using a solar panel and you want to know about that, there are some gadgets that'll easily tell you that. And so.
I just wondered if that had that capability. 'Cause if
Oh,
you did,
yeah.
You don't need the gadget. If you have that, you can just put it on and say, oh yeah, it looks good.
That's right. That's right. I'm going to be in so much trouble for saying it's a gadget. Just saying. Sorry.
It's all a gadget.
I know. So, yes, good question. Any other battery, solar questions? How long could you go with that? That's, the 12 volt should never limit you when you're boondocking. There is always something out there that's readily available and not unbelievably costly or difficult to use at this point in the development of solar. Should never be a limiting factor, in my opinion, unless you are in the redwood forest and there's not a piece of sunlight anywhere. You might have to move to, that might be part of how you pick which site you want to be in. You need one patch of sunlight coming through. So, propane, that's the other limiting factor, propane. If it's cold, you need propane for heat. Refrigerator and heat is the 2 things and cooking are the 3 things you're going to need propane for. You can carry extra propane. My suggestion is, knowing what you guys have, if your A-liner doesn't have 2 propane tanks, that could be outfitted.
It does. It can.
So you've got 2, you've got 1. So you can carry extra propane, or you can be conservative and see how long it will last. The propane for your food, there's always a way around that. We've talked about some of those things with the Yeti cooler, with cooking food that's not already pre-frozen. Refrigerated food in your gas refrigerator is easy and great. But if you don't have propane, there's ways around that if you plan. Again, with boondocking, you need to plan your meals. You need to plan at least a certain amount of food. I always recommend plan a couple of days of food that you can eat without cooking. Because guess what? You may want to stay a little longer, and you're going to try to conserve propane because you're getting low. Have some meals that you don't have to cook. That's always kind of my gauge. I want 2 days that I don't need any propane for cooking. The other thing is heat. You're going to want some heat. I don't know. Are you in cold weather?
Extra blankets.
Extra blankets? They make
Sleeping
wonderful
bags.
sleeping bags. Yeah. How cold is it? How cold do you want to be? So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, with a little planning on your part, most of the time, propane is not going to be your limiting factor if you want to be out there. If you have a larger rig, you'll have more propane. If you have a smaller rig, then you'll want to limit it. You'll want to be judicious on how much heat you use. You know, maybe you could set your heat at 65 and put an extra blanket on instead of putting it at 72. It'll make a huge difference if you're in 50-degree weather. If you're in 30-degree weather, I don't know, maybe set it at 55 and put on extra blankets. So that's a resource that I find pretty easy to work around. Does anybody have any comments or ideas on how to deal with propane or how to manage it. Pretty easy there, okay. That's kind of the resource management part of it, in my opinion. Like I said, I had trouble putting this together because there's so much that you can talk about and so many different levels of camping.
I forgot to say, we just bought one of the Yeti solar generators, which is really great in that I can plug that into the RV actually and have power to all my outlets if I want. And it'll do different, because, you know, she likes to have, she's got a little, you know, Crappuccino thing that she makes her stuff with. And, you know, we want electricity without having to run the, you know, the big generator and wake everyone up in the morning. And we can use that. And I do photography, so I need to charge up all my cameras. And that thing just comes in great, and it'll last forever. And you can
How
charge
long
it while
is
you're
it?
going down the road. You can charge it off that. You can charge it off solar.
It's a Goal Zero, right?
The Goal
The
Zero
Goal
one?
Zero?
Yeah,
or
the
is
Goal
it-
Zero
Yeti is the
Yeti.
model.
Yeah, we got.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so you pre-charged it and then you
Yeah.
just run
Oh,
off
you can-
that?
yeah.
How many days did that last?
Well, we haven't used it enough to know yet. I mean, it doesn't go much, you know, I used it this last weekend, and I used maybe 3%, you know, charging all my
Really?
stuff up,
Which
yeah.
one, which one was that?
Because we
It's
haven't
the-
had a lot of experience with people using those to really tell how well they
Yeah,
work.
I'll have to see how it done, but I got the one at Costco, which was the Yeti 1000, and so far, you know, I plug things into it, it'll run a hair dryer, it'll run the just our refrigerator at the house for about 5 or 6 hours, they say. So I found that really great because I'm, you know, like I say, now that your plugs work, well, here you've got 2 plugs plus you can charge it
USB.
with that, or when we're going down the road, I've kind of got it designed where I can plug it into the car and charge it when we're going down the road, or charge it just off the generator itself.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's a great piece of gear,
Yeah,
especially
that
if
sounds good.
you can use what you said you did and it didn't pull it down at all.
And they just really, I mean, this is a smaller one. They just released one that's, I don't know.
3,000
how
watts.
Yeah, like a lot
Mine's
more
1,000.
powerful.
This is 3,000, and it's
We've been at
like
the
10 pounds more.
laundry this,
Yeah.
We were
because
thinking of either
the one
getting
that just came
that
out
or
with is
getting
like
a
half the
real
weight,
gas
so it's
one.
like twice the price.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Yeah,
okay.
and we didn't talk about generators because generators work great. You can take a generator and power up, and that's gonna not only charge your battery but run an AC or whatever you need. Generators charge your batteries. I guess we didn't talk about that. Should have.
You
'Cause I
run
think
your,
we
you
have one
run
sitting
your
here.
microwave when you're out there too.
You can.
That's how Jim knows supper's almost ready. If I start the generator, he knows he better come back.
Needs to start hiking back to the campsite, right?
So how loud is that thing?
51 decibels. So it's quiet, but it's still noisy. So it's still a noise. The problem with generators is in campsites you have people around. When you're out in the middle of nowhere, you don't have anyone around. So again, it's a limited resource because it runs on gas. So if you're counting on that to run your air conditioner, it can run an air conditioner one night on one fill of gas. But you're going to have to refill it every night to run your air conditioner. So you're going to have to carry gas for that.
Okay.
So one of the best places to boondock in Texas is Big Bend.
But they don't allow
What?
it. They don't allow generators.
Exactly, but you cannot take a generator.
Mhm.
So the problem with generators is there are a lot of places that will not allow it. Again, another good thing at the ranger station to ask. Can I run my gen? And it's not just that you disturb other campers. It disturbs a lot of things and wildlife patterns and you know and then they've got fuel that people aren't responsible with. So generators are good, but they're not always a fail-safe. So yeah, there are some good alternatives out there.
You know, we're on the fence about generator or Goal Zero generator.
Well, if you're gone for a weekend, we have a rental program with some small RVs now. And we have a generator in our rental program. So if you ever wanted to rent just a generator, I bet this guy over here, whatever his name is, Clint. I have trouble with names, sorry. I do. So I bet Clint could work that out for you if you want to try it. Because, you know, that's the hardest thing. How do you try
Yeah.
anything?
Exactly.
How do you try it to see if you like it, or if it works, or if it's a pain?
Yeah, because our thing is we want to go on one of those road trips with no end.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we just left and you come
Awesome.
whenever you get tired of, like, being out there.
Yes.
So we were thinking, like, do we need to take that? Do we need to take that? Do we need to be set up for all situations? Because what if we don't have sunlight? Then we need to generate. Well, what if we have plenty of sunlight? We don't need the generator.
You know, that's a good question that a lot of boondockers ask. I don't know about doing that, because what if I don't have this? What if I need that and I don't have it? Well, first of all, my family will tell you, my natural response is, you're camping, okay? You're camping. Maybe it's not your favorite trip, and if you don't have something, you're going to find a workaround for the next trip, but you know, find out what the limitations are for your comfort level, because that's what no one can tell you. No one can tell you what you are willing to give up to camp in a beautiful spot without a single human being within 30 miles. No, we don't know. Obviously, you can tell from my conversation, I can give up a lot. I do not need a shower, by the way, so camping with you is out.
Well, after so many days now,
Yeah.
that's what we were
Oh, I
talking
know.
about.
I can't smell it, so I'm good. Yeah, if there's
You
nobody
can camp
else
with us.
around,
We never take showers on camp.
maybe it's that old thing about if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did it really make a noise? You know, if nobody can smell me, do I really stink?
Are you by yourself?
Well, maybe.
Well, it works then.
If I'm not by myself and it bothers them, they can go somewhere else. Anyway, rabbit trail, but it's tough to find the level that works for you. So my suggestion for just what you said is try different things.
Okay, we probably don't really need a generator.
Try different things and see where your comfort level is.
I think our biggest worry was whether or not we would ruin the battery by running it too low or being too long boondocking on it and not going, oh, should we start the truck up maybe and power back up?
And when
'Cause
you're
that was
driving, it charges
that's what
your battery.
we did is Rick would go out and he goes, well, I'll just start the truck up like that.
Yeah, and that works. And,
Okay.
and for people, there are some places where you have to change campsites every night. I mean, if you're driving every day, then your battery charging is a moot point.
Okay.
Then, because that's going to be charged when you're driving down the road. And you can always stop and pick up some propane if you run out. I mean, there's options there if you're traveling every day. Boondocking, really, managing resources is when you go somewhere and you sit there for a week. How long can I go without X?
Anything, right.
And then always have a contingency plan for if you don't have X. And if you have a day or two contingency plan, you won't be nervous about it. If you have 2 days of food that you don't need a microwave for, you won't be worried about it. If you have, some extra propane and you say when we get to here, that's our reserve. If you say, we're not going to need any heat, if we run out of water, I can always get drinking water, and we can go back to civilization tomorrow. I mean, if you have enough of the basics, then you can see where your limits are and make those decisions. So I don't know if we can help you with a little bit of that. Trial and error nearby is always the best way. And right now is the best time to camp in Texas because you can go to Big Bend, you can go down to the National Seashore if they let you camp down there yet, which they may not. I don't know what the hurricane recovery is like. But different places where you can camp without resources, do some boondocking that's not too far away from everything. It's pretty easy. Those are my suggestions to see what your limitations are before you take off on a never-ending trip. and then you'll know more. But it's something that nobody can say for you.
You gotta figure out what kind of camper you are.
Yep. We all need to make.
We're tent campers. We're
We
just
got
went
back from
into
3 days canoeing and backpacking.
Yeah. didn't
3
have
days,
any.
3 days canoeing, and then 4 days backpacking.
And you know, if you're traveling on a never-ending camping trip, that doesn't mean you're never going to pass a store. I try to explain to my husband that we will pass a store, and if you have forgotten something or decide you want something that we don't have, I bet we can pick it up.
Amazon, we'll send it to you someplace.
They might.
Yeah, drone drop it.
So yeah, don't over collect or overpack. Find
Okay.
your limits. And you know what? If you buy something and you don't use it for a year, 2 years, put it on Craigslist. Be done. If it doesn't work for you, doesn't work for you. Just don't slow down. Go have your adventure. Just don't sweat the small stuff. All right. I won't take too much of your time because I think we're all getting a little chair weary. But I did include about a page and a half of general rules of camping. Only because I think you always kind of wonder where the limits are, and I always like to remind people of things. I'll go through them quickly. The first rule is if there is a cleared site near where you want to go, please don't go to, one 50 feet away because you think, oh, this feels more like wilderness and the grass isn't packed down. We'll make our own little fire ring. It's so much better for the environment to go where someone has been. It's already had some use, and you'll have less impact on the environment. Most places will have a restriction of how close to a water source you can camp. So that's always a good rule of thumb when you're camping in a non-campsite area, because you can impact not only what runs off down there from your residue of your camping, and there will be some. The other thing is the water is probably a resource for wildlife, and you don't want them to do without water or change their patterns and wander into some weird place where they don't belong. Wildlife works in a very predictable way, and so if you're too close to the water, it causes a problem for them. The old adage, pack it in, pack it out, right? We all know that. The biggest issue, trash. Plan for trash, because that is the biggest problem when you are boondocking, is that you're creating trash and you don't have a place to put it in where a ranger comes by and picks it up and takes it away. So enough preaching about that. And of course the next thing is no bathroom. You do not have a bathroom on the premise that you can use. You will be using either your trailer or you'll be using the great outdoors. So I gave you some guidelines on the great outdoors, because if you're boondocking, I think it's a wonderful alternative to help reserve your resources and make your camper a better place to be. So there are some rules on that you can read through. The biggest one being part of the trash you're going to create is toilet paper. If you have a camper, you can put it in your tank. Probably you're going to be reserving water, so that's going to be something that has to disintegrate in your tank. So most people don't realize that toilet paper out in a campsite looks like you can cover it up with grass, but it's kind of a bad thing for the environment, and it brings in all kinds of creatures that you don't want right next to you. Campfires. I will get off my soapbox, but I will briefly say campfires are a huge responsibility, and many, 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 many forest fires are caused by campfires. The rest of them are negligence of drivers throwing cigarettes out, and that accounts for about 95% of campfires. Occasionally there's a lightning strike or something like that. The majority is campfire use, so you need to know that it's a big responsibility if you build a fire. So I've given you some guidelines on building fires. Pick a location. If there's a fire ring, use it. you might have to clean it up. If it's in a really bad spot, like under a tree or next to a big rock that's going to get charred, then move it to a good spot. Both of those are bad spots. Most people don't realize that campfires, if you put them under a tree because you think it's just a beautiful spot, it can actually damage the tree, and the heat can go down into the tree and actually start a fire. Now, does that happen very often? I have no idea, but I'm told it can happen. And then there's the sparks that are floating up, and the tree may have moss in it that you couldn't see at night. That moss is extremely flammable, and it floats, catches on fire, and it can float to the next tree that's completely dead. So, I mean, again, it's to be safe and not impact the environment any more than you need to. Pretty simple things. A lot of boondocking areas for camping require you to have a permit if you bring in firewood. If you collect it there, you don't have to. But that's another thing to ask when you ask about fires at the ranger station. So when you collect wood, be sure it's dead. Don't break up a tree that's standing because it looks really tired. Okay? Clean up after your fire. If your fire didn't burn completely, try to figure out how to take the big pieces and disperse them. Clean up your giant pile of ashes. If you spread ashes out, it doesn't hurt the environment at all, and it makes the next guy come in and want to use this beautiful little fire pit. Because the next guy may not be as smart as you, and he might build a fire pit right next door because yours looked all terrible and used up and had big chunks in it. Don't burn trash. Trash almost never burns completely, and the ashes from the trash that you burn are not good for the environment sometimes. So it's not a good way to get rid of your trash. Just put your trash in a bag. Whenever you're boondocking, trash bags are your best friend. You can use them for everything. You can use them for rain gear. You can use them for trash. You can use them for bundling up your dishes until you're ready to wash them or anything. Enough on the fires. You guys have a question on a fire. All right. Plan for the weather. Don't plan for perfect weather when you're boondocking because it's not there. Don't plan for no mosquitoes. Don't plan for any. Just pretend you're out in the wilderness, and you'll have a better time because the weather has more effect on you when you're boondocking than when you're in a campsite. So you're not going to want to go inside, turn on the heat, and watch TV for 2 days while the rainstorm blows through. Wildlife. This seems simple, but people who are boondocking, you get this feeling that you're out in no man's land. So that apple core that you just ate, it's biodegradable, right? Just toss it out. You're not thinking that the critters are going to be right there tomorrow. And if they find that, they're going to be looking for more. And the last thing you want is raccoons digging through your trash. I mean, they're terribly destructive animals. I would be more worried about raccoons hurting my solar panel than other people stealing it. Because, I don't know, raccoons just are destructive. So don't feed the animals. Don't put your extra bread out to feed the birds. Don't put your food out for any of the wildlife because it just invites trouble. And bears. If you don't know how to deal with bears and you're in bear country, there will be a pamphlet at the ranger station. Be sure you get it and be sure you read it. And be sure you have bear-proof containers for all your food at all times. Now that sounds like it's hard, but if you're boondocking, a lot of times more of your camping ends up outdoors. So just be careful with bears. That's kind of my general in the wilderness rules because people tend to think when they're boondocking that all bets are off and nobody's watching and who cares. So I think it is a bigger responsibility when you are boondocking to be sure you don't leave any mess. and everything looks as clean as you possibly can get it when you leave, because nobody from that campground is going to come around and clean up after you. So there you have it. A few soapboxes tonight. Thank you for being patient with me.
I'll get on my soapbox.
Yes.
Maybe take, if there is some trash when you come in, maybe take it out. A
Absolutely.
little bit of extra.
There is no reason for the guy previous to you to be as clean as you are. It doesn't mean that was there when I got here.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I put in there that if you get there and the fire ring is not in an appropriate spot, if you move it to what is a good spot for a fire ring, then the next guy's going to use that spot. If there's one over there under the tree, he's going to think, well, that's where it is, I'll just use that one. So, I don't know. I think there's some responsibilities in being a human in the wilderness, and when you want a boondock, that's what you are. And nobody's watching, but that makes it all the more important to do the right thing out there so the next guy can enjoy it like you did. So,
BJ, there's a few questions if you can scroll through just real quick.
Questions?
A few questions from the live feed.
okay, and you can tell I'm not the tech savvy guy, so first question, help me out. I like the feedback from people that use the equipment. Good, thank you. I did too. I always learn something. Robert says to repackage all store-bought food. Good point. When you buy food at the store, sometimes it's not packaged well. I usually double package everything, especially if it's in a cooler and I think it might get wet. So I find freezer bags invaluable. You may have another solution, you know, a freezer bag in a tub may be a better solution, but yeah, what you get from the store. A common mistake is a cereal box. Cereal's easy to take camping because you can just eat it right out of the box, but then you just roll down that top thing and put the thing on it, close the little cardboard top. It's not good enough. So, repackaging food, do you have a great idea? He was pointing at you.
Go to, she's the repackager. She
I
got
bought one
from
of those
vacuum seal.
vacuum sealers, and
Oh.
it can either suck it in or it can just vacuum the top. And I try to package everything into like 2 people.
Uh-huh.
So cereal would be like that. You would just put enough for 2 people and then you cut it. The only downside to that is you have plastic wrapping.
You've got trash.
You got trash.
Yeah.
So I like both ways. It depends on the distance. Like when we're backpacking, I would totally use that because
Mhm.
that's light to carry out.
Plus less smell.
And
For the
less smell. I
animals.
don't have to worry about that
Exactly.
one
Animals
thing.
will smell it,
Exactly.
so.
And I think freezer bag packing it and then putting another freezer bag over it is a good idea
Yeah.
because you never know where it's going to rub or leak or a corner gets damaged.
Right. And you
So
can reuse
double
your bags.
packaging is a good thing. I love freezer bags. And for those of you that don't know, you can actually wash freezer bags, let them dry, and use them again. I've done it for 30 years, and it's, yeah. You know, we're talking, when people are boondocking, resources is what you talk about. So use your resources well. Let's see.
You can scroll through them if you don't.
Well, you can scroll through them. I don't know how.
You can rewash Solo cups too.
Yes, and we do, unfortunately.
We do.
We do.
Yeah.
What racks do you use in your cooler?
Some coolers come with.
Brian has a question on 12-volt heaters for teardrops. There are 12-volt heaters that you can use in small spaces. The word is not coming to me. English, you would know it's my first language.
Sounds like.
What is it?
The type of heater,
Not Big Buddy.
well,
Cornell ceramic.
yeah, the little ceramic heaters.
Ceramic heaters, yeah.
They all have dead man switches on them. There's a couple of different kinds of heaters. They work well. The problem is in teardrops, it's such a small space.
Yeah.
If you're boondocking, 12-volt heaters, will work for a little while. They're going to use a fair amount of your battery space. Oh, look.
We
got
bought a
some
big
public.
buddy from Cabela, no, it wasn't Cabela, Bass Pro Shop.
Uh-huh.
It was a very small one because of our A-liner, and it worked okay, but we didn't like it. And we kept all the packaging, brought it back and said, we don't like this. And, you know, just, if you have something you don't like, bring it back and say you don't like it.
And
I mean,
why didn't you like
There's no
it?
sense in having it in your house and saying, I don't like it, I'll give it to my son or somebody. Just, if you have a legitimate reason.
It was a small one, but for the A-liner, it was really thick. It took up a lot of space, and it was like overkill for the size of the trailer. And I could see that something that size would heat up a larger 40-foot trailer. I mean, you don't need a lot of heat in those things when you're in it.
Yeah.
Especially, you don't need to heat the whole space when you're sleeping in like a section of it. But the A-liner is all this, so it's like heating that thing with that would have like smoked people out of there. It would all be sweating.
And they do make some smaller ones.
So, I mean, just be careful of the size of the heater that you want. I mean, the 12 volt, like you said, would just eat your battery alive. This was a gas powered one, so if it fell over, it would just die, goes off by itself. But
I'll have to say I'm not as familiar with specific brands of 12 volt heaters. I know I've had some customers that have used them, but in the end, the people in a tag, a teardrop that size, that doesn't have heat, they have told me that their very nice sleeping bag is so much better than even trying to heat it. So I guess, again, it also depends on the temperature. You know, if you're in 20 degrees, you might need something to get it warmed up.
So those don't have a heater, they have an air conditioner.
That's right. That's right. So the smaller teardrops don't have heat. And so, you know, that's a good question. I will do a little bit of homework and I'll post something on. I've got some people that I can find out what they use, but the reality is, it's tough to heat a small space. The 12 volt heaters do use a fair amount of battery. So I'll try to get better answers on that because I feel like I don't have that. I didn't answer that question completely. So check our postings on that.
But the plus is when they're small, it doesn't take a lot of heat.
That's true. And what I have heard people say is they just plug it in and warm it up, and then they turn it off, and then they crawl in their sleeping bag. So again, like we were talking about, there's different levels of what you're willing to endure. You know, if you want the temperature to stay 68 degrees all the time, that might be tough if you're in freezing weather. So yeah, we'll come up with some more ideas. Robert has said, bag your meals in a Ziploc bag, warm the food in warm water, and reuse the water, and then eat out of the bag. So, very easy. We talked about that in kind of different levels, but if you look at it that way, you can heat up water over the fire, stick your bag in there, eat out of your bag, put your bag in the things to be washed in your mild dish soap water when you get that far, and then there you are. And you're done, and then you still have water. So,
I've been with the water that I'm washing my dishes with, because I wipe them all out like you were talking about. I can take that water and use it, heat it up again later and use it to wash dishes a second time.
oh, absolutely. You can even save your dishwater.
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
My dishwater, and then when I need clean, you know, I will, whatever I rinsed my dishes in, that becomes my dishwater then for the next time.
You know, there's a lot of people that think water will be the next currency.
Yep.
And it's amazing how much water we use on a regular basis. So when you're camping, if you can learn to be careful with it, it's amazing how long a gallon of water can last and what it can do for you. All good ideas. There's some other comments about using a basic pressure cooker, not an Instapot or some type of gear like that. Pressure cookers especially on a propane stove, are very quick, and they don't need near as much water. They're a little bulkier if you have a tiny camper, for some people, is the comment I've heard. But if you use it for almost all your cooking, that's a great idea too. All right. What else? I'm trying to get through all the comments. Grills are good, safe fire pits. Interesting. Take a bow saw, I guess, to a big grill. You could drop it and have a fire pit. That's an interesting way to do it.
A bow saw?
Mm-hmm. To cut the grill, I'm assuming.
Or cut the wood.
Cut the wood.
Oh, cut the wood.
I've got friends that they're like, yeah, I have this
To
saw.
use
I
the
have this
grill?
saw. And I said,
Oh,
well,
like
if
it.
you need that saw, you probably don't need a fire that big to have a saw. You
Yeah.
can, like you said, I think you said in here about just snapping the wood off. I come from backpacking, so if you have a tiny little fire that's no bigger than this table, you have a tiny little fire. I mean, there is times when you can have a bonfire, but if the wood is there, but if you're just out in the woods, I never carry a saw.
We just bought one of those small.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
Is it pretty cool?
Yes,
It's
it
pretty
is. It is pretty cool. I have to admit, it uses propane. We carry an extra propane tank just for it, but because Texas has restriction on fires, but not gas, it's kind of like a nice alternative for
And
the
we've
ambience.
We've been trying
Yeah.
to figure out how to
And-
cook over it too.
And
Can you grill on
we
it?
decided to, well, we weren't gonna grill over it, but we were gonna get a tripod and use a cast iron pot to heat up stew while we have our fire that is in
It's
a
about
contained.
as big as this table.
Yeah,
and
it's not very big.
It's got lava rocks
Very-
in it, and it's
Very
it
light.
puts
And you have a
it-
little
it's quite
propane on
big.
the side, and it gives you a little bit of fire.
Yeah, we just carry an extra 5-gallon propane tank. We just pull it out, hook it up, kind of
Yeah.
hide the tank. sit
Like I
around
said,
it.
there's 100 ways to do this. It's really what works for you.
And the thing is no sparks, no smoke, no worry about
Right.
a forest fire, because I would hate to be responsible for something that horrible.
Yeah, exactly. It's a huge responsibility to have a fire in the
Especially
wilderness.
these days.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a question about how big of a battery bank can the Tagger Integ trailers mount? And that's a good question. There's always modifications that can be used. Why? First of all, let's back up. Why is that a good question? Well, because if you have 2 or 3 batteries on the front, you have a lot more battery power, and you can last a lot longer. So, like we talked about, 2 propanes and 2 batteries, even on a small trailer, will allow you to do a lot more boondocking. You can also get a bigger battery, so that we could talk about batteries forever. How many can mount up there? We have only modified up to 2 batteries on a unit like that. Could there be more? Yes. There probably could be more. What you want to avoid, since they are right up front on the tongue, is getting your tongue weight too heavy. You know, a battery is going to weigh, what, 30 pounds? How much does a battery weigh? Anybody know?
25, 30.
25, 30
Pretty
pounds?
hefty.
So it's possible that 60 pounds added to the front won't be that big a deal, but on some of the lighter vehicles you'd want to look at that, because that's a lot of reason why people get a tag or an intag. And it also depends on what's on the front. The one behind me, this one actually has a tray, an aluminum tray, so this would be pretty easy to modify and add a few batteries on here. You might have to modify this front tank, but there's always a way to do that to fit them in. Always a way to add at least one more, sometimes more than that. And that's going to make a huge difference. For a lot of people in the smaller trailers, the batteries is their main resource when you're boondocking and when you're traveling. Also, solar panels can only do the only reason to have a solar panel is to charge the batteries. it can't run anything, it just charges the batteries. So if you have more batteries here and a larger solar panel, it's going to recharge faster and you're going to have more 12 volt at your fingertips. So yeah, it depends on the trailer, but definitely 2, maybe more depending on the configuration of that trailer. So is there anything we didn't talk about that might be helpful?
Johnny says, please discuss personal protection at rest stops, truck stops, and rough boondocking.
Oh, well, it's actually a
Easy
good
to
question.
Yeah. Outside of the state,
Yeah,
it'd be tricky.
Wasp spray.
yeah,
Wasp
actually bear spray and things like that, a lot of people carry. You know, I'd love to hear other people's comments on that because, you know, I think that's one of the reasons people don't. Biggest protection that you